CEO of DriveWise Canada. Lesley spent more than 20 years in advanced learning focused on simulation-based programs in both the aerospace and road user safety industries. She gained expertise in aerospace by leading programs for NASA, the FAA, Canadian Forces, NAV Canada, and the US DoD. She and her partner brought this expertise to road safety in Canada, and they quickly dominated the industry with more than 300 corporate clients, which is really, really impressive, including Canada Post, FedEx, Suncor, Vail, Canadian Forces Military Police, Toronto Police, a number of fire services such as Mississauga Fire, Alberta Justice, and multiple Canadian colleagues. So quite a list. Lesley is a registered professional trainer, certified management professional, certified in Kirkpatrick, 4 levels, and a graduate of Brock University. Lesley has been recognized with various honors, including Brock University Alumni of Distinction Award, and twice named to the Profit W100. I would like to turn this over now to Lesley for her presentation, and thank you for joining us.
So thank you for coming this afternoon, and thank you for the great introduction, and I hope that I'll keep you interested for an hour or so. You're late. Somebody allowed in when you're late. So what we're going to talk about today is the use of simulation in delivering remote community programs, but a little bit about how we think simulation could be used in this industry just overall. I had a speaking partner. His name was Chris Boomer, and he represented one of the program people that we work with from the Northeast Native community, but he couldn't come today. And he called and asked, you know, do you think it would be possible for you to speak for a whole hour instead of half an hour? Which I found very confusing because he's met me. So that's pretty self-fulfilling. So I thought maybe what we'd do, on your seats to start with, this is one of the items that we use in our course. And it's an audience response system. So all our program is about getting your learner interactive and engaged in the learning. So we'll do one just to see, so I can see who's in the room. So basically you pick it up, and there are little letters on it, A, B, C, D, and you pick where you are from. And we'll get an idea of the dispersion of the room. So it's pretty even spread across where we're all from in this great country. And what kind of a community do you live in? Now, one of the reasons we use this in training and start all our programs this way is it helps the instructor to know who their target audience is, and you can change your teaching methodologies and your teaching message based on the distribution of your class. So just about everybody is from an urban center. So this should be kind of interesting. So this is one of the communities that NINUS services with their remote programs, but not only is it an area that they service, it is also one of their target places for employment. And I don't know if you can see the picture too well, but as you can see, the roads, they're not so paved. And I don't see a lot of traffic lights out there happening in that for them. And this is one of the bigger communities that they service in northeastern British Columbia, and one of the places that they want their graduates to go and get work. This is where Martin and I on Sunday, when we scooted up here a couple of days earlier, we drove to Northeast BC to take a look at one of their communities and take a picture. So you're trying to get somebody their driver's license and teach them how to be a commercial vehicle operator or just how to drive in general. Not such a complex learning environment. So it creates quite a situation for the youngsters. And this is the type of occupations that we're training them to move into, from basically being back there at a very small community in a dirt road. So the program was started with them to help them get their driver's license. It's a huge barrier to employment in remote communities in the north. Huge, huge barrier. I kind of find it interesting because we have a lot of training that we do in the Toronto area, and people never train till they get outside of Toronto because they don't have their driver's license. So it's kind of the same predicament, but in 2 different locales. But this is a really big issue for them. It is a huge barrier to employment. So even if the driver's license we're going to help them get is to not help them become a commercial vehicle operator, but just to get to their job as an engineer or as an electrician or whatever profession that they've gone into, it stops them from being employed. So this is what we usually have as kind of, it's very scientific, and obviously my graphic designer didn't do any work for me on it. But it kind of shows the risk profile and we're your competency-based. We're a competency-based training program, people. So this is, are there adult learners, educators in the audience? No. This is a thing called, there you go. It's called Bloom's taxonomy. And those are the 3 main things that adult learning developers always utilize. And it's whether what you're trying to build is a knowledge-based program, an attitude, or a skill. So we mapped out where you need to be in this competency-based matrix to do these occupations. And then the risk level of the environment and the occupation you work in. So not necessarily anything to do with the driver, just the risk hazard identification. Oops, sorry about that. And then we put the northern ones on top. And this is all done from all the learning needs analysis that we do with our clients across the country and just basic research on the occupations. So sadly, not yet a research study, but I would love to do one. But this is how we classify them as risk and where they need to be on this grid matrix. So up here, they're a little bit, even if you're long haul, but you're up here because you have different occupational hazards than you have in your normal long haul. And if you take a drive around the Yukon while you're up here, you're going to understand that instantaneously. The highways are pretty narrow. There are some turns that I don't like making in a car, as Martin will attest to, let alone I'm going to do that in a train combination tractor trailer. So back to these guys, let's add in the drivers. So their risk profile, though, is based on them as people. And where I've placed them is what they usually come into our programs at with a prior learning assessment, what they have as knowledge when they enter. So these guys up here, which is probably on average between 16 and 20 years old, they do have prior learning knowledge. Most people think, they're a novice driver, they've never done anything, they know nothing. They do, because they've been in a car in an urban center for pretty much their whole life. They've watched driving behaviors, they've been involved in driving situations, they've seen the stop signs, they've seen street lights, they've seen everything. So this is where they come in. And then you're trying to get them to here. So you're trying to get them to where you need to be in competency. And you need to try and lower that risk category that they're at so they can perform these operations. And then what you have here is what's called a competency-based gap. And that's what you're trying to fill with your program. You're trying to get someone from here down to here. And it's a pretty even descent in normal urban rural type programs. But then when we put it into a northern program, you get a very different profile. Because sometimes this person taking this program up here is going to go immediately to there. And they're going to start to be driving oil tankers and truckers and up in the oil pipeline areas, and they're not going to really have very much driving experience whatsoever. So you have a much, much steeper gap that you have to fill. And that's, for a learning instructor, developer, that's one of the hugest problems of the remote driver training is your prior knowledge that they're coming to program with is at such a lower level than someone in an urban and rural environment. They simply haven't had the exposure. So there's 3 challenges that we're faced in this program. Number 1 is one that we face all the time, and that's just traditional driver training and the approach that's taken to it. The learner experience, and a lot of that issue was based upon the fact of our learner profile being so different, and remote delivery. Some of these places are incredibly difficult to get to. So, another little quiz here. Vehicles have preventable collisions, A, 85% of the time, B, 50%, C, 25%, and D, 0% of the time. And that's the way all the research studies word it. But it's kind of, for me, a bit of a trick question, because it all goes back to how driver training is. So most people picked what research shows, vehicles 85% of the time. I believe the correct answer is 0, because a vehicle never has a collision. The driver has the collision. So why are we always equating it and trying to make it depersonalized that it's about the vehicles is always kind of astounded me. So in traditional driver training, when they started to build it, they were like, well, it should be like we train pilots, and pilots all about technical skills. So if you remember back to the Bloom's taxonomy, there's knowledge, attitude, and skills. So immediately, 95, 98% of driver training focused on, hey, let's train them like pilots and do all the technical stuff that they learn in the cockpit, and that's how we'll train drivers, and we'll do skid schools, and we'll do all that cool stuff. And the whole programs are technical skill based. And that's what I found in this profession when I entered it from aerospace, which was a very different approach to what we have in the aerospace industry. Because even we don't train pilots like that anymore. So using one of the CCMTA studies, which I love because it actually is going to put things into Bloom's taxonomy, and I don't even know that they know they did that. So the main causal factor assignments attributed to the vehicle, 60%, 25, 80, less than 5% of the time. Got a couple of more people that are. Well, I'll choose for you. So that's correct. So everybody knows the stats. So here, as an instructional designer looking at this, I'm thinking all the programs out there, 95, 98% of the content is based on solving less than 5% of the problem. And it's not even addressing where most of the problems are. And these are the actual stats out of that study. Here you have 3%, and it's all about brakes. And another way to look at that data, which I really like that graph because I really think it, more than a chart table, brings the point home. Everything's being concentrated down here, but your problem's over here, which is all attitudinal. So like these guys have started to change, and they no longer just do technical training. About 15 years ago, while I was still in aerospace, the whole way of looking at how we trained pilots was changed from being totally about technical skills to being about human factors, managing your cockpit, managing your interrelations with air traffic control. And air traffic control is, in my opinion, what driver training should be more about. Air traffic control is less than 5% about technical training, learning your radar scope, learning your vectors, learning that kind of stuff, and it's 95% about cognitive skills, decision making, and your attitude. And I know that because this is me. And when I looked at this picture, I realized that was a long time ago, and I had a really bad haircut. But I also went through the first course in the Canadian Forces that used air traffic control simulators. And I know that it made a tremendous difference in how I approached my job. Unlike the driver training industry that does everything time-based, which I don't understand at all, the military and the aerospace industry use competency-based training. So what used to take 2 years to qualify after your course and be a certified controller, I was certified in under 3 months. And it was because I was addicted to the simulators. Martin and I had just gotten married, and I was the only woman on course, and I wasn't allowed to go out with the guys all the time. So I spent a lot of time in the simulators. We spent hardly any time preparing for this, which is what driver training seemed to have focused on. And we spent a lot of time training here, recognizing we had this hazard in front of us long before it occurred. So that's where we start our training programs overall. The second aspect of traditional driver training is the training methodology, in my opinion, is extremely outdated. It's how we haven't trained in aerospace in probably 35 years now. It's all about these big books and people falling asleep in a class, unless, of course, I'm speaking, right? And then take them out in a vehicle and drive around and say, there was 40 hours. So, looking at how traditional learning has occurred, how much of my session will you remember in 6 months? Based on it just being lecture. Yep, lecture-based learning is the most ineffective way of teaching anybody to do anything. And it is more than 50% of what's done in driver training. This is the little Bethune main research results as to what learning retention results from, where people remember things in more than 6 months. And here I am up here, which is not a good place to be. So all of our programs are built to target at least from 30% down, with the majority being 75% or higher learning retention rates. And this is where virtual reality simulation falls, if it's built right. So the two pictures I've been showing you earlier are actually simulators. And I'm sure that maybe a couple of you that are familiar with simulation picked up on that, but probably most of you did not. This is actually a Boeing 737 simulator. And this is a simulator that is at NASA, which I'm really familiar with because I was the vice president who built this. And it's pretty cool. It does every airport in the world. And the reason it was built was the FAA had been buying lots of equipment to solve all these problems pilots and air traffic controllers were having, and solve runway incursion, and everybody will just fly themselves around and it'll all be great. And then they started having more incidents. So this was developed for human factors training and research to figure out, how do you implement all of this automation safely into an environment? And this is why I know simulation works very powerfully. This is a picture of a Boeing 707 that was taken, yes, that's how old I am. This was taken by my air traffic control assistant about 5 minutes before it came around and crashed. It was a controlled crash, which I think maybe the pilots don't really understand the difference between controlled and uncontrolled. It probably still hurts. And he came around and he did what they call a controlled crash. Couldn't get his landing gear up on one side, would only go down on the other. And I received an Air Force commendation for it. But when they were telling me on the tapes everything that I'd done, I remembered very little. I probably remembered 1/10 of everything that I had done. But it was all a skill set that I had built in simulation, because I had practiced that very emergency probably 50 times in a simulator. So the second part of the training aids that I have difficulty with is the in-vehicle portion, because you are confined as an instructor. The fourth thing you're going to do is you're going to instruct your student or coach them, mentor them, whatever phraseology you care to use. Because the first thing you're going to do is ensure their safety. The second thing you're going to do is ensure your own safety. The third is the integrity of the vehicle. And the fourth is you're going to coach. Very ineffective way of doing training. And you also can't do any standardization. So when you take someone out and you do some training with them one day, and they have a day like this, and then the next day Jimmy goes out with you and he has a day like this, your stimulus for training are different. So you can't possibly be trying to achieve the same learning outcome. You're getting an entirely different learning outcome than the person had the day before, because all their stimulus is different. So simulators, though, everybody's going to drive that. Everybody's going to drive that. And you're going to see what their behaviors and their attitudes are when they're in this. You're going to see whether they adjust. You're going to see, and you can let them go. You don't have to pull them back as the instructor and say, my God, why are you going so fast? Don't you see the ice on the road? You can say to yourself, my God, why is he going so fast? Does he not see the ice on the road? And you can watch that person and see when will he recognize or she recognize the threat perception that they have. Outside of simulation, hopefully you don't have instructors that are going to do that, that are going to say, hey, let's see how far this skid goes. So NENIS, we'll talk a little bit about them and their learner experience. So they're ICBC certified Academy for Training Class 1, 2, and 4 with programs that we built for them. And they also do Class 5 and 7. And the whole part of the program was to break down that barrier of entry for the youth to get employed. Right now, the graduates of the programs have an 80% employment rate or higher, which is, I understand, a very high rate. So over 80% is a lot higher than what they were hoping to achieve, so they're pretty ecstatic. And I'm speaking on their behalf, but you can feel free. I can provide any contacts you want that you can you can discuss with them. They go to multiple communities in a very, very large area, and they do a little bit of this instructor-led. But the problem that they were having when they were trying to do that traditionally in the past was the youth could not equate at all. As hard as it is for us when we have kids that have grown up in urban and rural centers to understand the dangers of distraction when they're driving, or to understand speed control in that, or to understand busy intersections or HOV lanes. These poor kids that were in the north, they had no idea what people are talking about. They couldn't put the theoretical material they're being given, they couldn't visualize it in their head. They couldn't figure out how does that impact? How do you apply that in real life? So the simulator allows them to basically be put into absolutely any situation they may encounter. So when you're on the sim, you're not driving out on that little dirt road I showed you in a truck saying, pretend that when you go up to the oil fields that the grooves are this deep in the road and you have to go through and it's messy rain and muddy and such. They're actually going to be put in that situation on a simulator. It can also do city, it can do rural, it can do just about any driving environment you need to do. So this is the Class 1 program, but for example in the Class 5 on the passenger vehicle simulator, they will put them as if they're driving in downtown Vancouver and teach them how to navigate through an intersection with lights. They've never seen lights in their life before. Some of them apparently have been down to Vancouver, but I'm told that more than 70% of them have not been to a large urban center. But if they get some of the jobs that they're after, they're going to be going there. And when they get the confidence, they tell me, then they're more willing to go there as well. They're more willing to expand outside because they have a new skill set. They feel more like they can fit in. So the simulator is a thing called experiential learning, and it allows them to be told something, but then have the immediate opportunity to apply that skill. So they take a little bit in the classroom, then they go into the simulator, and they can immediately apply what they learned. And that gives them the time to assess what they did, to understand where it went right or it went wrong for them. We usually encourage that people use simulators in as a group activity in a simulation lab, because you learn a lot by group discussion and by picking up on what other people heard from you. Then you have the chance to analyze it. So they get to reflect and they get to go back on it and talk to each other and say, you know, what could I have done better there? How could you have avoided that? And after the reflection, they get a chance to apply it a different way. And then the cycle just goes around for them. And it's not time-based. It's based on when they hit the competency level. When are they able to back into a dock if it's a commercial truck that they're being taught to utilize? When will they be able to drive down a highway and be able to do skid control? If they get caught in a crosswind, how will they recognize that they're starting to experience a skid situation? So the whole program is a competency-based one rather than a time-based program. So this is generally how we set up our labs. So as you can see, there's a big review screen here for people to be able to see what's going on. And the whole secret to simulation-based training is how you build your program. If you just utilize it as a replacement for in-cab and not as a way for people to understand different environments and different places they'll be, it makes it a lot more difficult to achieve success. But if you try to target the outcomes that your people give you, and for us it was they need employment. Well, where are they going to be employed? They're going to be employed in the oil sands, they're going to be employed in the mines, and they're going to be employed in northeastern BC. That was the goals of the target of the funding. So in our simulators, they're doing all of this before they have to do it live. And it gives the student a chance to not be called back, because it's not very good to build your self-confidence when you're out in a Class 1 vehicle and all the time the instructor is pulling you back and do you see this, do you see that, pull back here, shift lower, shift higher. It gives them the chance to recognize their own levels of competency and to develop them, and to gain that safety thing that I am a pretty safe driver. I did see that. I do look ahead. And they can see the effects if they don't. The other big factor that we had in the training was the remote for training. It was a pretty large area. So it basically goes all from here, I was told, down to right down in here. And they do not do it seasonal, they do it all year round. So some of these places getting to in the winter is pretty dramatic. So this is what they utilize to do it. And it's a complete standalone unit. They have 2 of these. One is outfitted with 2 driving simulators, and the interior of it is a classroom like this. And they have standalone computer-based workstations. And the other one is outfitted with heavy equipment simulators that we provided. And that's it, because I actually couldn't speak for more than a half hour. So do you have questions about simulation at all? Or? Yes, sir. It really depends on the trainee. It's not so much a time frame as it is until they can hit a certain level of competency to it. Yeah, the NINA's program is on average 14 weeks in duration. Yes, for the class 1. If it's the new driver training, it's about, I think it's about 50, 60 hours that they do on average. Yeah. My recommendation is for someone that's going to be driving a new piece of equipment is that you can't do everything in simulation. It's a bridge between the classroom and your on-road. That you still need to do a bit of technical training in the vehicle live, but you can accomplish a lot in the simulator. You can basically get them to about, I would say, 70 to 80% of the way there before you actually take them out. For some occupations, I wouldn't let them be on road until they had been in a simulator, live occupational, like police, fire, EMS, because this thing does full, oops, it's gone. That's me, and I am a thing, but not really. But this does full lights and sirens and such, so you can actually see if someone can handle the stress of their job, being in a response type situation before they go live on the road. And you can put them in situations that hopefully they're not practicing in your city. I would say that the simulator is much more effective at picking out where someone needs work than any instructor, and I'm an instructor myself. Because an instructor is no matter how hard they try, they're a very subjective person. A simulator is not subjective. This is going to pull data out. It's not going to say, I think you were following too close. But when you go out with Jim tomorrow, Jim might not think you're following too close. The simulator has parameters that are built into it that it's going to tell you you're following too close all the time. I put this person through 15 different exercises, and they followed too close in 15 separate exercises. This is a habit that they have. So you're able to get more of an objective assessment of them to see what their true parameters and nations are. And simulation, whether it's driver training or it's aerospace training, what you do in a simulator is what you do in real life. Your mind does not have time to comprehend that that child just ran out from the curb. It's a simulator. Your mind just has time and the reaction time allocated, the way the exercises are built, that I see a child running out. So it's a simulator is only in the excuse part of the debrief. Yeah, quite a few of our fleets actually, that's what we do is remedial training for them. We usually have 4 streams of program and processes based on what the infraction was as to whether they take online or they take this, that, or the other thing, but quite often it is remedial that you use for. But what you're able to do if your remedial processes are built well enough is that when they're on here, I don't believe in remedial training where you put 5 people in a room and you give them a course, unless all 5 of those people did the exact same thing wrong. Because here, what you can do is say this person's difficulty is following too close and not adjusting for weather conditions. You can train them on that. But having them in a room with someone whose problem is that they back into the dock all the time, one of them's not going to get their problem solved. No, I asked Ninas if they've been tracking the kids, and I know. No, they haven't been. We did do a study with kids in our own facility in Barrie for new drivers, and it was about distracted driving and texting in particular. Sorry. That is when I didn't know whether I wanted to mention it. When I asked them what their lesson learned was that they still have to take them because of regulation to an ICBC facility that's over 2 hours away at the closest for testing, and it's a hindrance to the program. Yeah, so sadly, they still have to go down to do the testing, but at least when they go, this simulator, when you drive over curbs, you're going to feel it. So they will understand about cornering too close. Yes, sir. If your training's built correctly, you should have a learning theory your whole map plan should be based on competencies at the end. And then you have periodic learning objectives that you're trying to achieve over time. So you take the theoretical knowledge and then you weave the learning objective into the simulation exercises. So you have to, every time you clicked, by the way, this has a number on it, and it's creating a scorebook on your student in a tricky little non-threatening format. So you're theoretically testing the knowledge, and all the questions that are put into the quizzes in the classroom reflect what they're going to be tested on in the simulated environment, or what they're going to be trained on. And then when you get that practical reinforcement, you're checking off the competencies in multiple ways. You're not just, oh, Jim says he's really good at 45-degree angle turns. Oh, that's good. It's got to be mapped. Yes, sir. That was probably the biggest hurdle that I underestimated when we entered this, and it was because I was out of aerospace, and no one would ever consider having a training program without simulation. So the first time that a commercial truck operator owner asked me, well, how do you know simulation works? I did kind of look at him like, huh? Because it's just so much our norm way of training. Basically, I think we looked for people that were kind of innovators on the cutting edge themselves of how they ran their fleets. And we started at that aspect of it to utilize them. And then we had them, or they tracked for us their own reductions. And people will be more accepting when you can show them continual 30% collision reductions and efficiencies and shorter time to people being prepared for job. So you get it into our new driver training program. At first we presented it the same as the boring videos that other people had in their programs that were basically a cigarette break for the instructor. Yeah, but yeah, there was a real learning curve for ourselves in how to get it into the industry, and for the industry to understand the power of simulation, what it can do for you. Yeah, we even use multiple different types of simulators. We're a training development company, we're not a simulator manufacturer. So there are ones that people call simulators that aren't. They're what's classified in the aerospace industry as level 4 computer-based instruction. And that are your guys that they go out and they have single steering wheel, single screen, very small 17 to 24-inch screen, and they say, come to our school and use our driving simulator. Well, it's really just glorified computer-based instruction. Probably properly built computer-based instruction would be better, so I don't bother with those at all. If you can't do at least 3 screens and see 180 degrees, I don't consider it to be a valuable learning tool any more than computer-based instruction. If it is just a desktop type thing, and there actually are classifications of desktop simulators in the aerospace which could be easily translated over, it should only be targeting specific 1 or 2 specific learning objectives during the exercise. Something like this is still not a full simulator. It's still just a part task trainer because it doesn't have full degrees of freedom, movement. But what it can do is be mobile and train multiple people and come in at a price point that's affordable and still get a strong feedback. So the second part of my question, investing in simulators. Well, the first thing I always want to know is how a company looks, or a fleet looks at training. Do you look at it as a cost expenditure, or do you look at it as an investment? And based on that answer, I know whether I should just go and say, nice meet you. If you look at it as an investment, like Toronto Police purchased a simulator and a custom program about 1.5 years ago now. And they spoke at we do a user group every year, and they spoke at our client group last year. And in the first year of their program, they'd recovered the cost of their infrastructure and another $300,000 just in reducing the metal cost, not even taking into the human factors element to it, just how much money wasn't being spent repairing City of Toronto police cars anymore. So you can build a business case pretty easy. The problem is there's a real disconnect in the aerospace industry and the military. We use the adult educators that are designing the training. We all have credentials in adult education. We all are certified instructional designers. Not so much so in driver training sometimes. So, and then you have simulator manufacturers who sell equipment. They're not instructional designers or certified trainers either. So there's this big knowledge gap that exists. So I think sometimes people buy a simulator and they have the best intentions, but they're not really sure how to effectively utilize it in the environment, and then they say simulation doesn't work. Well, to me, that's like saying a projector doesn't work. If you don't know how to plug in that projector and utilize it, it's not going to be very useful to you. It's all about the content that you build. It's not about, I could run my programs, I can think of 8 simulator manufacturers that I could use and not really see a huge difference in my programs. It's about the content. Yeah, that's a really good question, because a lot of people, they if you saw them with their team at the simulator, they would have their instructor right here like this, standing on top of this guy, and they try to use it as a replacement for in-vehicle, and they'll sit them there for like 15, 20 minutes as if they're driving down a road. What you're trying to do is you're trying to get across, I'm trying to go back to a picture here. You're trying to get across a learning objective, right? So in ours, this guy, if he's talking to him while he's driving, all he's doing is training him how to drive distracted, right? I don't want my coaches talking to my people, my participants, while they're driving. I want him interacting with these guys. I want him showing them things on here to point it out. So our exercises, our longest is 5 minutes. Most of them are about 3. And if your training curricula is built correctly, you're going to hit your learning objective within 3 minutes, and they're going to learn something they'll never forget. On our exercises, if you do everything that you were taught to do, it's really boring. It's really, really boring. And then you get a bad driver on, or someone that's a very high-risk driver, and they make it look like the most exciting thing in the world, and they're crashing kids, and their cows are flying through the sky and all that. And they say, oh, nobody could have avoided that. Well, then this person gets on. Notice I point to the girl. And she does exactly what she was taught to do and drives through a very similar type of, all our exercises are all different, but the learning objective is the same. The stimulus is just varied up. And they see how easy she avoided a similar type situation. You have to, it's a nice way to give someone a kick in the pants. Without pointing them out, without centralizing them, they come to the conclusion themselves, oh my, that 10 kilometers does make a difference. Or when you replay it and you put fog in here, the fog won't show on here. And we usually have something very nice set up hidden in the fog. So this person comes driving down, and they don't adjust their driving behavior at all for the adverse weather rolling in on them. And all these people are sitting back here going, what an idiot. Because what they have is they have the God's eye view of a situation. And they can see, holy crap, if he saw that, he would be slowing down. And that's the whole point of teaching people how to, so things that you can never get across in a cab, that you can never get across in a classroom, you can get across in simulation pretty easy. But I would still want to take them out in a cab if they're a new driver. If they're a recurrent driver or remedial, no. We had one fire service that called us, and someone had had a nervous breakdown, one of the firefighters. And he'd been off about a year, and he came out, and he went out with the city driver trainer, and the city driver trainer said, he's good to go. He should be able to drive fire apparatus again. So the chief training officer called me, said, I want to put him through your program, and I'll accept your results. And I said, well, your results are going to be exactly how he performs. So we put him through an 8-hour program. The first part of the program was just proactive driving, defensive driving, cooperative, whatever the terminology in your region is. And the same on the simulator, those type of exercises. He scored in like the top 99 percentile in both, on the simulator and in the thing. Then we did emergency vehicle operations in the classroom. Once again, top 3rd. Then we put him on the simulator, and he had to hit lights and sirens. And he had a collision immediately. He could not take the stress of hearing those lights and sirens and trying to do a high-speed drive to destination. He'd lost his confidence. And he said, I'm not going to go to my union. I agree. I can't do this. I thought I could, but as soon as I heard that, I just felt everything, heart sweat and the whole bit occur. So you can help people come to a conclusion that they weren't being stubborn, they didn't realize themselves. Yes, ma'am. Yes. Aging drivers are an interesting thing. You do have extra concerns sometimes with older drivers about simulation adaptation syndrome. We find every time we get a new version of the simulator that's getting massively reduced, and it's because of the change in technology and the update of the graphics and such. It's also, they're a very high stress person when they come in. because they don't want to change their life. They don't want to hear, I can't go to the store and that anymore on my own. And quite often when someone brings their parent to us, they don't want their parent to drive anymore. They're actually wanting us to convince them that they shouldn't. But I would be a little hesitant for another few years to really use simulators heavy for senior drivers, just until the technology gets a little bit more advanced for the eye movement time. I think it's still just a lag behind. So even in our own programs, we use it a bit, but we watch the senior to see if we think he's going to suffer from SAS. Amazingly enough, we're a brain injury assessment place as well. And they have absolutely no trouble with the simulator whatsoever. And you can learn some very interesting things when you're doing brain injury assessment with them, because you can actually measure their response times and how much RPMs they put on and have it all measured out. And it's a good way. You can replay it, and they can see what their actual performance capabilities are. Yeah, oh yeah, any good simulator does. This one has 9, 10, Super 10, 13 and 18, 13 and 18 speed transmission. It has one more, but I don't really. And it has 102 or so different types of configurations. And you can change all where the weight loading is in the truck and the trailer, and you can do sloshing loads if you have a fire truck or you have oil tankers or such. So you can really vary it up, yeah. Yeah, the dynamics they're pretty good. They're really getting there. Oh yes, yeah, the way the exercises are designed, it's all cause and effect. So if they are driving 10 kilometers too fast, it's set up that the physics will not allow you to be able to avoid the incident. If you're driving within the parameters, the safety parameters, your eye lead time, you're going to be able to come to a stop or swerve and avoid. So they are set up that way. One of the most effective things about the simulator is for texting. There's no program, whether it's new driver or commercial or any sort of driver, that we don't have them text and try to drive while they're on a simulator, and then replay it. And even if they haven't collided with something, they are amazed at the way their driving skills deteriorate. It's quite substantial. You'll see the lane deviations, you'll see the change in speed immediately. Most of them do kill someone, only in simulation. But that was the research that we did do with the simulator, and we have a pretty good classroom module on distraction, I think, probably way ahead of all our competitors for the new drivers. And still, when they did the questionnaire on would you text and drive, about half of them said that they might text and drive in life. Then we put them on the simulator, and 100% said they would never text and drive. Now, whether that held up for the rest of their life or not, but at least we had made that immediate impact on them. And that's all you can do in the time that's allocated, unfortunately, in the industry. Because we don't enforce recurrent training, but that's another story for my daughter to solve, I guess. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Yeah, this one actually does do articulation in that. The difference in the level of training or evaluation that you're talking about isn't so much to do with the simulator as it is to do with the content that's built to it. But yes, this definitely, a good simulator will have air brakes, will have, like this one, it has a glass dash to it, so every time you put up a different type of vehicle, the glass dash reconfigures to reflect the type of vehicle that's being simulated. Most of the good simulators on the market now do that. It also has a camera up here, and the 3 top manufacturers have this as well. And it's recording all of the physical movements, and then it interpolates it with the recorded data. So that's what this little screen is here in the replay. It will show everything that they physically did while the data's playing as well. And then in the background, you can also spit out a report, and any good simulator should have that, back to that question, is an evaluation tool in the background. And the evaluation, a good evaluation tool doesn't say that someone needs to work on adverse weather driving. That's a condition that you set up to test a competency. Adverse weather driving is not a competency. Changing your driving for conditions is a behavioral attitudinal adjustment that's a competency. That it's snowy is just a stimulus. It's not really a thing. But back to your original part of it, when I showed the graph at the beginning, and it was showing where people rested on a competency matrix, which is way, way at the back. That's how you build how complex you make your tests. Sorry. It'd probably be quicker if we could, oh, got to do something about that haircut. It's like when you get your passport and you think, oh my God, what a horrid picture, and then 5 years later you're like, wow, I looked really good that day. So here, oh sorry, now I went past it. So where they fall in here, that would decide where you're building your competency. This is where you decide how much content you're building. So this is someone driving a passenger type vehicle, light duty vehicle. And this guy up here is going to be your guy driving your big rigs with your different configurations. And then the specialty training is when you get into the trains and such. So all along you're building different modules that are addressing different levels of competency. But the main problem that I've always had with driver training is everybody focuses in here, which has very little to do with preventing collisions. And when they do testing, that's where they test. Whereas you should be testing back here by data. So, but that's just my political 2 cents, I guess. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I got to look under here. Oh, I have it here. That was really interesting. You can tell by the number of questions. We started off talking about remote communities, but this has far more application than that. And I know from my own ministry, we had a question from policy, training, registration, and driver improvement programs. So we'll be in close touch with our Toronto police forces when we get back, and then with you also. So thank you very much. On behalf of all of us, small token of appreciation. We have coffee back in the exhibitors hall, and at 4 o'clock the next concurrent session will start again. So hopefully you all will attend one of those. Thank you.